I'm back. Facebook did something odd and bumped me off almost in the middle of a sentence, so we'll try to pick things up. I think I'm live. I see a spinning here, so I'm not sure. Okay. So Henry initially was anti-Luther. He wrote things against Luther, and the Pope actually gave Henry the title Defender of the Faith. But then things started to shift. And the story of Henry's battle with the Pope over Henry's desire to annul his marriage to Queen Catherine, who was also Henry's former sister-in-law. She'd been married to Henry's brother, who died, and then Henry married her. It's a long and a complex battle. And to cut to the chase, it's likely that both Henry and the Pope had mixed motives. Henry had some theological training. He found some Old Testament scriptures that may have genuinely bothered his conscience about his marriage, but also by this time he had gotten his eye on Anne Boleyn, wanted her for a wife. So he was looking for a way to get rid of Catherine, who had not given him a male heir. She had a female child, Mary, but no male heir to become king. The Pope probably didn't have the best motives either, because at this time, the Pope was being held captive by the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So what? Well, the what is the Emperor was the nephew of Queen Catherine. So the Emperor didn't want Henry to divorce his aunt because the aunt wanted the marriage to go on. So the Pope probably largely opposed Henry's annulment, not on principle necessarily, but in order to save his own neck, because he is captive to the Queen's nephew. Now, this led Henry to declare in 1534 that he, not the Pope, was the head of the Church of England. But keep in mind that Henry was encouraged in this by people, men and women, who wanted the Church of England to move in a reformed direction, a more Protestant direction. And they didn't get what they wanted initially. Initially, Henry kicked the Pope out, but tried to keep the church pretty much exactly as it was, except Henry was in place of the Pope. But gradually, the pressure built and things shifted slowly. Henry had tremendous power. He was able to hold things back, but even his heart started to shift somewhat. And step by step, the Church in England was becoming less like the Roman Catholic Church and somewhat more like the Reformed, the Protestant churches that were forming in parts of Europe. And one of the people pushing in that direction was the newly consecrated Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. When Henry died in 1547, his unhealthy teenage son, Edward VI, becomes king. Edward's Protestant uncle was the regent, had most of the power, and influenced Edward toward moving the church in a reformed direction. Sweeping changes were made in doctrine, in teaching, in worship. The Bible was freely translated into English now. A Book of Common Prayer in English was developed largely by Archbishop Cranmer. But sadly, in 1553, after only 6 years as king, the young Edward died. His half-sister Mary, daughter of Henry's first wife, Catherine, becomes queen. Mary is Roman Catholic through and determined to force the Church of England back under the thumb of Rome. And in only 5 years as queen, Mary had over 300 Protestant believers burned at the stake. That's why she was called Bloody Mary. And the people chafed under that hardship. When Mary dies in 1558, her half-sister Elizabeth I becomes queen. Elizabeth is a Protestant. She's the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife. And she was taught as a child by Cranmer. And by the way, Archbishop Cranmer was one of the victims of Queen Mary's executions. Elizabeth forcefully moves the Church of England back in a Protestant direction, forcefully, but not violently. She didn't have the mass executions of Catholics like Mary had executed Protestants. Under Elizabeth, the foundation for the modern Anglican Church is laid. Many early Anglican leaders seek to be what they called a via media, meaning a halfway place. And some believe what they meant was that they were halfway between the Lutherans and the followers of John Calvin. Others believe what they meant is that they were halfway between Protestants and Roman Catholics. And as you look at the Anglican Church, you'll see there's some truth in both of those ideas. In fact, some of the early Anglican theologians called their faith Reformed Catholicism, and some Anglicans still use that term, being reformed in doctrine, but holding on to the Catholic faith and form, not in a Roman Catholic sense, but again in that broad sense I talked about early in the first part of this, part of the universal church, holding on to the way the church believed and worshiped back in the days of the undivided church. Now, tying in with this, Calvin and Zwingli followed what's called the regulative principle, meaning they claimed to throw out anything not found in the Bible. In contrast, Luther and the Anglicans followed what they called the normative principle, meaning they kept everything in the church that was not forbidden in Scripture. So the Church of England has bishops in the apostolic succession, teach the real presence of Christ in Holy Communion, but not transubstantiation, as Roman Catholics do. And we Anglicans have liturgy. Most have vestments, because we saw Scripture does not forbid these things. The more radical reformers said, well, Scripture doesn't teach them, so we're throwing all that out. But Anglicans, and to some degree Lutherans, said, well, Scripture doesn't forbid those things, so we're holding on to them. Now, I was going to share a screen with you, but Facebook is not giving me that option, so I can't do that. All right. This wraps up this part of Anglicanism 101. Thank you for staying with me. I hope that others will join us later. And we'll continue this study next week. Tomorrow, we're going to have Words of Hope, going back to the 20th chapter of John and looking at the story of doubting Thomas and what it teaches us. You have a good day.